The kid finds out at 7 years old that he has zero magic power, which is basically a death sentence for anyone born into a family of mages. It's a complete disaster because magic is all about genetics. Both his dad and his late mom were mages, so the expectation was always there. And then there's his sister Procel, who's the same age and already has her powers. He really thought he'd be just like her, so he tells them to wait. Nai shouting that he loves magic more than anything else in the world. He's not ready to give up yet and asks if it's possible his powers just haven't shown up. A man stands by him, mentioning how the kid is talented and has already studied a ton of difficult magic books. But the answer is cold. 0 means 0. They tell him there's no mistake and that's just how it is. Things are already bad, but turns out what happened next was actually way worse. By suddenly everyone starts screaming and yelling for people to run, and then some guy points out a heretic right before this black slime stuff grabs a villager. People are completely losing it, and the whole street turns into a mess. Everyone is panicked, shouting that the heretics are coming and telling each other to get out while they still can. It's total chaos as this giant black mass of faces and eyes starts taking over. People are screaming that it's going to swallow them whole and that they're all going to die. People are screaming for everyone to run while Abel grabs Purcell, pulling her close and asking if she's okay since the village is being overrun by heretics. These twisted things used to be human until they started worshipping dark gods, and now they just show up out of nowhere to kill anyone they see. It's a complete nightmare, but Purcell looks up at her brother, totally terrified. Abel doesn't have magic, but he grabs her hand tight and tells her it's going to be fine as long as they stay together. He pulls her through the panicked crowd, telling her they need to get out of there right now and they start running as fast as they can. Abel knows his sister is the one with magic, so he feels like he's just a burden holding her back. But suddenly she screams for him to watch out. He stops dead in his tracks and looks ahead. The street is covered in bodies, and standing right in the middle is a dark, swaying figure. Abel can feel it immediately. This thing is way different and much scarier than any normal heretic. The thing in front of them isn't a normal monster. It's actually a deity, and it starts lashing out with these huge fiery tentacles that rip right through the air. Procel tries to block the attack by shouting a spell to bring up an earth wall, but the shield just cracks and crumbles instantly. Abel starts losing it and yells at her to stop because there's no way she can take this thing on alone without getting herself killed. He begs her to run, but Procel just stands her ground and tells him not to worry since she's the one who's going to protect him. Right as she says it, a massive spray of blood hits the ground and Abel's eyes go wide as he has a sudden flashback to when they were little kids. Back then, his dad was always hyped because Abel could draw these super complex magic circles all by himself, and he told Abel he'd buy him every single magic book he ever wanted. The old man was totally convinced that his son was some kind of once-in-a-lifetime genius destined for greatness. He even asked his wife if she was seeing this, and Abel's mom just smiled from her bed, saying she knew for a fact that her boy was going to grow up to be an amazing mage. But that dream is basically dead now. Abel screams his sister's name as he looks down at her broken body lying in the street. Abel holds his sister's body in the middle of the street, begging her to just hang in there and open her eyes for him. He realizes she's still breathing and catches his breath. As long as she's alive, he thinks he can still save her with healing magic. But his face goes pale when he sees a terrifying circular mark on her skin. It's the mark of the deity Zoe, a nasty curse that literally drains the life out of whoever is wearing it. So normal magic won't work because deity curses can't be dispelled, meaning there's only one real way to fix this. And it involves an old legend about a guy named Paracelsus, who was the only one smart enough to create a specific legendary item. That item is the Sage Stone. Abel stares at the ground and decides right then and there what he has to do. He looks completely locked in, vowing to sharpen his skills until he can actually create a Sage Stone himself. He thinks back to everyone saying he'd never be a mage because he was born without power, but he just clenches his fist. He doesn't care about having no magic anymore because he's going to do whatever it takes to save his sister. Procel weakly calls out to her brother. She tries telling him she's okay, but Abel just holds her tight and yells her name, his eyes welling up with tears as he looks at her. He starts sobbing, telling Procel how sorry he is for everything that happened. Looking out over the city, he makes a silent promise that from this point on, he's going to be the one to protect her no matter what. Suddenly a voice starts calling out to him. Procel tells him to get up already, and Abel snaps awake at his desk looking completely shocked. He can barely get his words out, staring at his sister and saying her name like he's seeing a ghost. She just looks back at him, asking what his problem is. He shouts her name again, and she gets annoyed, telling him she's right there and asking what he wants. Abel doesn't even explain himself. He just screams her name and pulls her into a huge hug, relieved that she's actually okay. He calls out to his sister while crying his eyes out, saying he really can't believe it. Procel looks at him with a serious expression, promising that she'll do everything she can to help him out. But then she immediately loses her cool and summons a massive magic fist that slams Abel right into the ground. The hit is so hard that Abel looks like his soul is literally floating out of his body while he lays there wrecked. Procel gives him the scariest look ever, calling him a creep and warning him that she'll finish him if he tries anything like that again. Abel groans from the floor, asking if using magic to attack a regular person is even allowed under the code of ethics. Procel just stays annoyed, reminding him that he's the one who jumped up and grabbed her without warning. He tries to explain himself, saying he was just checking her temperature to see if she was okay, but she just thinks it's gross. Abel fixes his glasses and plays it cool, telling her it's completely normal for a brother to worry about his sister. She tells him to worry about himself for once. She points out he's just staying home instead of going to school and asks what his plan is. He looks at all his research and says he has something important to take care of, but she's heard that excuse way too many times. It's been 9 years since that crazy day, and Procel has grown up a lot since then, staying busy at magic school. Abel hears all the time about how she's a total natural, and he couldn't be prouder of his little sister. Looking back at that day, the weird mark that showed up on her neck didn't stay long. It just vanished. Abel is actually the only one who even knows it was there, since Procel never saw it, and she's been acting totally normal. But he knows deity curses don't just stop. He spends his time digging through old books until he finally finds the page he was looking for. The book talks about deity Zoe, a member of the 8 calamities known for governing life itself, and turns out, the life-draining curse is a real nightmare. It hides while it gets worse and only shows back up when the victim is right at death's door. Abel reads that the victim eventually goes through absolute agony. Based on when she was cursed, he realizes his sister is going to die in her 30s if he can't pull off a miracle. He knows right then that he has to save her no matter what. So he's betting everything on creating that sage stone. That's why he's spent every waking moment buried in magic research ever since. Abel realizes that creating a legendary treasure that hasn't been seen in 1,000 years is a massive goal. Definitely not something people expect from a random kid, which makes the pressure pretty heavy while he stays locked inside. He skips school because he thinks regular classes are a waste of time for him, and the neighbors are already talking, gossiping about how hard it is for his dad to raise a shut-in like him. Neat, but he's too focused on the fact that having zero magic is a huge disadvantage. He's constantly buried in his research and feels like the clock is ticking, getting stressed because there just aren't enough hours in the day to find a way to save his sister. After a long night of studying, he wakes up at his desk and realizes he's fallen behind on his reading. Right when Procel bursts in and scares him half to death, he tells her he didn't even notice she was standing there, which just makes her even madder. She starts yelling about how she's been calling him for ages and that breakfast has been sitting on the table, so she ends up literally dragging him out of the room by his collar. She calls him a total shut-in and points out that he hasn't eaten or had a drop to drink in 3 whole days. Yet as they head down the stairs, he's still got his face buried in a book. She tells him to put it away before their dad sees it, since he's definitely going to lose it if Abel brings research to the table. But Abel doesn't seem to care much. He just shrugs it off and says their dad is always mad at him for something anyway, so there's no point in worrying about it now. Procel tells him not to pick a fight on purpose, especially since she's already stressed out. She mentions that her exam season is coming up fast, and Abel is actually shocked that it's already that time of year. She reminds him they're the same age, so he should be worried too, while he asks where she's planning to apply for her magic studies. Procel mentions she's aiming for Pram, the elite magical academy, and Abel is actually impressed. He brags about her being his sister while she looks completely drained by his energy. The mood shifts as the family sits down for a formal meal in their huge dining room, but the atmosphere is way too quiet, mostly because Gilbert is staring Abel down with a look of pure rage. He growls out Abel's name and tells him to put the books away while they're eating, but Abel doesn't even look up. Procel is sweating and tries to keep her head down while Gilbert tries one more time to get the kid to listen, and yet Abel just keeps stuffing his face and reading his book like nobody else is in the room. Gilbert finally loses it and screams his name, causing Procel to freak out. She whispers for Abel to stop before their dad explodes, especially since Gilbert is literally growling like a beast. But Abel just casually says he's too busy to talk. He explains he has a self-assigned deadline for his next thesis and needs to finish 2 more books today, which leaves Procel completely confused. Abel acts like it's obvious that he's writing a thesis on magic, and the news is so weird that it actually makes Gilbert stop being mad just to remind him of the obvious. He tells Abel that he doesn't have a drop of magic in him, so he's not a mage and shouldn't be doing that kind of research, but Abel just gives a smug look and tells his sister she's not thinking hard enough. He starts lecturing them about how magic research is biased and needs him to fix it, though Purcell makes it clear she never asked for his opinion. Abel keeps shouting at the table, insisting that doing magic research is totally possible even if you have 0 mana, and he starts bragging about how his last thesis was based on that exact idea, claiming the content was actually groundbreaking, but Gilbert cuts him off mid-sentence just by saying his name in a low voice. He reminds the kid that he's at the age where most people are already graduating and moving on, so Gilbert brings up how he told him to pick a real job recently. He sits there with his hands crossed, asking if Abel has actually made a choice yet. Abel doesn't blink, telling his dad that he made up his mind a long time ago. He's definitely becoming a magic researcher. The room goes dark as Gilbert tells him he better be joking, but Abel just doubles down and says he's completely serious, which leads to Gilbert losing his cool and throwing a stack of papers onto the table. He asks Abel if he can still talk big after looking at those, making Abel freak out when he realizes it's his own writing. He stares at the pages in total shock, wondering why they're even in the house, until Gilbert drops the hammer. He tells him the publisher he sent the work to rejected it, and that it's time for Abel to finally face reality. Gilbert keeps laying into him, saying there's no point in even reading his work because the whole idea of magic without power is just ridiculous. Abel tries to defend himself by giving the actual title of his paper, arguing that the theory is still solid even if he doesn't have mana himself, but his dad just looks at him with this cold stare, asking how he's ever supposed to prove any of it. He asks if Abel really thinks he can make it happen, before telling him straight up that it's impossible. Abel stands there looking at his ruined papers as Gilbert tells him that being unable to prove his work is exactly what having 0 magic means. Gilbert gets right in his face, telling him one last time to face reality because the path of a mage isn't for him. Abel doesn't back down though. He looks his dad in the eye and says no matter what, this is something he has to do. Oh, he's dead serious, telling Gilbert that there is no way he's ever giving up on his magic research, which is the final straw for Gilbert. He slams his hands on the table and says he's disowning him and wants him out of the house immediately. Abel is completely caught off guard as Gilbert starts dragging him across the floor, while Purcell screams for their father to stop. The heavy iron gate slams shut with a loud bang, as Abel is tossed out onto the street with his bag flying after him, leaving him reaching back through the bars while Gilbert walks away, asking if he can at least have the book he was currently reading. Gilbert tells him he's giving him enough cash for basic needs for now, but warns him to find a job before he blows through it all, and then he just locks the door and walks off. Abel drops to his knees on the stone ground, totally stunned that this is actually happening. Moving on to a quiet side of town, Abel finds a cheap inn to stay at for the night, and as he lies on the bed, he thinks about how he ended up there. He's officially homeless and unemployed, wondering what he's even supposed to do next. He just lays there staring at the ceiling in the quiet room, but he refuses to give up on his research. He knows he has to make it work, especially since he's already memorized every magic book he's ever touched. He's still pretty annoyed about how fast his dad kicked him out, and it really gets to him that the old man called his theories naive. He looks through his bag and finds nothing but clothes, realizing it's not much, but he's glad he at least has that. Abel checks his funds and realizes he actually has a decent amount of cash on him, enough that he might even be able to pick up some new research gear, which gets him thinking about the basics of world building, specifically how everything is made of fire, water, earth, and air, including the legendary Sage Stone. He figures that if he can just master the theory behind those 4 elements, then creating a Sage Stone for himself should actually be possible. So he decides on a starting point. He needs to dive deep and really get how the fire element works first. His main goal is to pull off a standard fireball spell using pure science instead of magic. But so far, every single one of his experiments has just blown up in his face. He's struggling with the inconsistencies of fire residue and how it reacts in a vacuum, admitting to himself that he's having a really rough time making any progress. He lays there under his covers, telling himself to think harder because there has to be a way to finally reach a breakthrough and find the truth. But suddenly he snaps up with a look of realization on his face. He's finished sitting around because he realizes he's hitting a wall because he doesn't have a single book to reference. And the lack of research material is actually starting to make him feel a bit crazy. Knowing he can't make any more progress on his own, he decides he has no choice but to head to the one place that has what he needs. Abel finally makes it into the bookstore and lets out a long, happy sigh. just soaking in the quiet vibe because it's exactly what he needed. The shop owner, Mr. Ganan, looks up and greets him with a big smile, telling Abel it feels like it's been forever since he last stopped by, and Abel gets right to the point, excitedly asking if any new magic books have hit the shelves lately. Mr. Ganan tells him he's in luck and shows him a fresh batch of titles covering everything from earth magic and metal training to a beginner's guide for making potions. Mr. Ganan points out that these are the absolute latest releases, which gets Abel pretty hyped as he grabs the one about lightning theory. He starts reading and finds the book claiming that while lightning is technically part of the fire element, its real nature is still a total mystery. The book mentions some wild ideas about gods and souls, but Abel thinks that's all just fairy tale nonsense, deciding that he'll be the one to find the real answer later. But after skimming through a bit more, he realizes there's nothing useful in these pages, so he just snaps the book shut. Mr. Ganan watches him and can tell right away that the material wasn't nearly good enough for what Abel's looking for, and Abel confirms it, explaining the book was just some old theory reworded to sound fancy, so he puts it back, bummed out that finding a decent magic tome is so tough. Mr. Ganon laughs and admits he's no expert on this kind of stuff, so he's pretty much useless when it comes to technical magic books. But he tells Abel it's a massive help having someone with his eye for detail look things over. Abel thinks back on how he's been coming here since he was a kid, and the owner always goes out of his way to find books he knows Abel will actually like. It's a good setup because since a lot of mages shop here, Mr. Ganon gets to use Abel's crazy knowledge for advice. And suddenly, the shopkeeper realizes he forgot to show him something. He starts digging through some stacks, saying there's a specific book he's been saving for Abel's next visit, mentioning it's a rare find that might be exactly what he needs. Mr. Ganon pulls it out and shows it to him, explaining that the whole thing is written in the ancient language. Abel is completely hyped. I'm saying how amazing it is to see the ancient tongue in person, while Mr. Ganon just laughs because he knew Abel would be hooked. The owner admits he has no idea what's actually inside, so he can't even price it, especially since he showed it to a mage friend who couldn't understand a single word. He explains that these days, even real mages have no clue how to read the ancient language anymore, leaving Abel thinking about how that old tongue is from 1,000 years ago, back before Paracelsus helped create the modern language everyone uses today. Abel thinks about how all of Paracelsus' writings are still in the ancient tongue, and it's the same deal for every single book in the Origin series. He's always believed that to really understand magic and find the truth, you have to be able to read those old words, so he spent years studying it, even though it was a total grind. He remembers people telling him it was a waste of time, but now Mr. Ganon is leaning in, asking if he can actually read the title for him. Abel asks where a book this old even came from, and the owner explains that a friend found it while tearing down an old warehouse. They thought it was a magic book, which is why it ended up at the shop. But Mr. Ganon knows if it were a rare Origin book, he'd be rich, though he's not holding his breath. Abel takes a closer look at the cover, pointing his finger at the old script and reading the title out as The Principles of Science. He repeats the word to himself, looking confused because he's never heard of science in his life, and he has to break the news to the shopkeeper, telling him it's definitely not a magic book or anything from that special series. Mr. Ganon completely loses it, crying because he was hoping he could at least sell it to a mage if it had some magic in it. The owner says nobody would buy a normal book in a dead language, except for Abel. Abel can't even argue with that, standing there looking pretty awkward. Abel looks at the shopkeeper with a really serious look on his face. Then he calls out to Mr. Ganon, keeping his eyes glued to the old book while he asks if he can actually borrow it. Abel says he wants to take it home and really study the details, and Mr. Ganon just laughs it off, telling him to go ahead since he's the only one who can read the dead language anyway. As he stares at the pages, Abel starts thinking that maybe, just maybe, this find is a lot bigger than it looks. So he looks at the ancient script, feeling like this is the exact thing he's been looking for to finally uncover the truth. He starts reading through the notes about old experiments, and the text says something wild, claiming it can prove that the fire element doesn't even exist. This goes back to Paracelsus, the legendary supreme mage who just showed up 1,000 years ago. And he's the guy who turned random myths into a real field of study, becoming the grandfather of magic that some think was sent by the gods. But he also left behind those 7 Origin books, which are still filled with high-level mysteries that no one has ever been able to figure out. The Origin series is basically the Bible for magic. It covers the 4 elements and every major theory. Every single magic book out there is based on these texts. And for mages, they're the absolute truth. But Abel realized that he used to be just like them, believing everything those old books said without a second thought. That all changed when he found this new book. He just sits there at his desk for hours, staring at it and trying to wrap his head around the section titled The Principles of Science, a concept that seems completely alien compared to magic. It takes him a full week just to get through this one part, mostly because what's written inside is so shocking that it's hard to even imagine it's real. The problem is that everything in these pages goes totally against the absolute truths mages swear by, especially the stuff about the 4 elements. So Abel takes a moment to just sit there and process it all. He looks down at the pages with a serious look on his face, finally deciding that he's done just reading. He tells himself it's time to get to work and decides to start an experiment to see if this science stuff actually works. He follows the notes on how to create something called oxygen, starting things off by heating up mercury in a glass bowl until it leaves a residue. He watches the flames carefully and cranks up the heat even more. Then he starts collecting the gas that bubbles up through the water, just like the book says. Abel looks closely at the gas he just caught, realizing this is the oxygen the book talked about. Suddenly, a flame flares up with a loud whoosh, and the brightness of it completely catches him off guard. He tests it with carbon dioxide and nitrogen, but the match just sizzles out. So he decides to mix hydrogen and oxygen instead. The mixture ignites with a massive whoosh, and Abel yells out as the burst of heat fills the room. Now, the jar is burning his hands. He has to keep switching his grip because the glass is way too hot. As it cools, he sees water droplets forming on the inside, confirming that hydrogen and oxygen really do make water, just like the book said. He stands there at his desk for a long time, looking down at the science book with a completely different level of respect. The book is packed with different experiments for every single theory, and Abel goes through every one he can to see the results for himself. After all those tests, he feels ready to try making a fireball again, thinking that all those past explosions were actually good practice. He figures out that explosions are just things oxidizing really fast and that they need oxygen to happen, which is lucky since oxygen is everywhere in the air. Abel keeps reading and finds out that everything is made of atoms instead of the 4 elements, which sounds like tiny grains he can't really prove with his current tools, making him look at how metals burn. The old way of thinking says they should get lighter as fire leaves, but science proves they get heavier because of oxygen, and this logic goes way beyond just metal. This whole discovery is honestly amazing to him. It explains everything their current magic theory misses, and looking at the facts, the proof is just too strong to deny. He's convinced now that the principles of science is the real deal. It explains how the physical world actually works, and he's starting to see the world in a totally different way. The book is over 1,000 years old, so he wonders if science was a big thing back then, and maybe the rise of magic is what eventually killed it off and wiped it from history. But if this book is right, it makes him wonder what magic even is. Modern magic is built on that 4-element theory, so there must have been a massive clash between science and magic long ago. He stays there for a while just thinking about the past and how everything connects. The sun is out over the house as he realizes one thing. He's going to need to run a lot more experiments to get to the bottom of this. Later on, Abel sees his sister Purcell and gives her a huge, seed-friendly greeting, but she just stands there with a totally blank look on her face. Without saying a single word back, she just slides right past him to get away as fast as possible. As Abel gets back to the house, Purcell demands to know why he's there, warning him that their father will be furious if he tries to come back. Abel tries to explain that he just needs to use his room, but Purcell isn't having it. When Abel asks for her help with something, she immediately shuts him down with a loud, "No way," making it clear she's not interested in whatever his creepy brother is up to. Abel realizes things are getting desperate, so he starts thinking back on everything he knows about his sister. They've known each other since birth, and he's pretty sure he knows exactly how to get what he wants, mostly because she's always been a pushover whenever he puts the pressure on. So he grabs her hands and tells her she's the only person in the world he can turn to, calling her his only hope. He's convinced that if he pleads with every bit of strength he has, she'll eventually give in, just like she always has in the past. But Purcell just gives him a cold, flat refusal. She stares him down and says no without even hesitating, though Abel won't let go, literally begging her and saying this favor means everything to him as her brother. Purcell just gets annoyed and tells him to get off of her before she summons a massive magic fist to blast him away. He gets sent flying with one hit, completely wrecked by her Puno Gigante spell. Purcell scolds him, saying it's morally wrong to use magic on a non-mage and that he's getting exactly what he deserves. But Abel just groans and says he's not giving up. He tells himself to keep thinking, desperately trying to come up with some way to actually get Procel on his side before he just stands there in total silence, making things awkward while she waits for him to say something. Procel looks him over and lets out a long sigh, finally giving in and telling him fine. Nah, she'll do it. She tells him she'll help, but the second he finishes whatever he's there to do, he has to leave the house immediately, which she claims is only because he's so annoying and persistent that she knows he'd never stop. Abel starts tearing up and yells about how she's the best sister ever, lunging forward to hug her while screaming that he loves her. Procel loses it, telling him to get off and to stop crying because it's embarrassing. So she ends up squishing him with another Puno Gigante spell, leaving him looking totally ragged and bleeding from his nose. Despite the beating, he holds up a capped glass jar and asks her if she can manifest a fireball right inside of it. Procel checks to make sure he wants it inside, and once Abel gives the word, she makes a fireball flare up right in the jar. Then he tells her to make another one the exact same size, only this time it needs to be outside the glass. Abel asks her to keep them both going at once, and she just goes along with it, holding both flames steady. A good bit of time passes by on the clock. And Procel eventually asks how much longer this is supposed to take while Abel just watches, noticing that despite one being inside and one being outside, both fireballs haven't changed or flickered one bit. He realizes that if these were regular candles, the flame in the jar would have run out of oxygen and died out ages ago. So he asks if she's using the same amount of magic for both, and she tells him that of course she is. Abel follows up by asking if one feels harder to keep up than the other, but she says she can't feel any difference at all. The flame in the jar finally fizzes out as Procel says she's completely beat, and she flops onto her bed while Abel just stands there with his arms crossed, totally lost in his thoughts about how magic works. Abel holds up the glass jar and asks Procel if she can manage one more fireball inside of it, but she's totally spent and tells him there's no way. So he explains that she doesn't even have to keep the flame going this time. He just needs to see if she can make it appear before putting it out. Even with the easier task, Procel says she just can't do it yet and needs to rest for a little while longer. While she waits, she watches Abel closely as he starts clinking his jars and tools together, getting everything ready for whatever he's planning next. Abel holds up two different containers, showing her the one they just used for the fireballs and a brand new one that's the exact same size. Moving on to the next step, he lights a regular candle and places the jar over it while he waits for the timer to start, and within seconds, the flame inside the glass starts to flicker and completely goes out. Abel sees that it died right away, just like he thought it would, but Procel just stares at him, wondering what he's even trying to do with a candle. He tells her he's running a magic experiment and points out that the flame died on its own, though she just reminds him he's not even using magic, which Abel has to admit is true, so he shifts gears and asks if she's finally got enough energy back to help him out again. Abel holds up the glass jar and asks Procel to create just one more fireball inside of it. He's thinking that if this was a normal jar, the air would keep the flame going, but since he's sucked out most of the oxygen, she shouldn't be able to make any fire at all. Procel calls out the spell and a fireball poofs into existence right inside the sealed container. Abel just stands there, staring at the jar in total disbelief. He asks if this specific fireball is any tougher for her to keep alive, but she just tells him it feels exactly like all the others. Abel asks for one more favor, and though Procel is totally wiped out, she agrees as long as it's the absolute last one. So he tells her to try making one more flame inside the jar that has the dead candle sitting in it. She casts the spell again, and a bright flash of fire fills the glass. And it's then that everything finally clicks for Abel as he watches the fire burn. He realizes that magic fireballs don't use oxygen at all. Turns out only regular physical fires actually need air to keep burning. Abel realizes that even though magical and physical fires look the same, they're actually two completely different things. He trails off, lost in thought, while Procel looks at him wondering if he's finally lost his mind. But in his head, he can almost hear the sound of massive gates swinging open. He gets right to work at his desk. The sound of his pen scratching against the paper fills the room as he makes a vow to use science to recreate magic from the ground up. But he breaks down how spells actually work. You need a mental image, a construct, a circle, power, and an incantation. Since he has 0 mana, he knows he can't cast anything normally. But the math behind the circles is where he really shines. He starts feeling pretty good about himself, thinking how all those years of boring study are finally paying off. The standard way to build a new circle is to map the whole thing out on paper first. But Abel knows that even that part is way harder than it looks. Abel keeps at it with his quill. He really thought swapping out the old element ideas for atomic theory would be a breeze, but the reality is way more complicated. He knows traditional magic circles always start by asking for permission from the gods, but he's not sure he even buys into that. He starts wondering what would happen if he just added actual science to the math. It would mean rebuilding the whole system, but he's starting to doubt if those higher powers even exist. So he gets back to the grind at his desk. He figures the only way forward is to map out every single hypothetical pattern he can think of. He goes back and forth on whether the gods used atomic theory themselves, or if they're even part of the equation. Eventually, he decides to just write everything in modern language and see what sticks. 5 days pass by in the village as he stays cooped up working on his new circles. Finally, he puts his pen down. He's got a massive stack of theories ready and feels like at least one of these has to be the winner. He decides to start with an ignition spell. It's the most basic, efficient thing a mage can do, so it's the perfect test. He adjusts his glasses with a look of total focus. It's time to see if all this studying actually pays off. But it's a total bust. He ends up face down on the floor while Purcell just stands there staring at him like he's lost it. Abel is just hanging out in his room when Purcell sneaks in behind him. She's totally fed up, yelling that she can't believe he's doing this again and asking if he even understands that he's been disowned. Abel just gives her a casual, yeah, while holding up his new papers with a grin. He tells her he actually brought a present she can use for her upcoming entrance exams. But she's just confused about why he's giving her magic circles. Purcell lets out a long sigh like she's talking to a kid. She tells him that trying to cast magic with a circle someone else made is completely pointless, but Abel just replies that he already knows that's basic common sense. She keeps explaining the theory, mentioning how everyone's soul is different, so even the same spell needs a unique circle to actually work. It's the reason every mage has to build their own specific circles from scratch. Abel jumps in to correct her, saying that only matters for the really complicated stuff. He explains that for simple things, anyone can use the same shareable circles without a problem. Purcell's vibe gets scary fast. She can't believe he snuck back into the house he was kicked out of just to give her some basic circles when she's applying to the best magic school in the world. Purcell is getting pretty heated, asking Abel if he seriously thinks she needs practice with something as basic as simple fire magic. Abel panics and tells her she's getting it all wrong, begging her to stop threatening him with those giant magic fists. He tries to explain that these aren't just normal circles, they're actually a total game changer. He slams his hand down on the desk and tells her she needs to just look at what he's actually made. Purcell looks them over with a skeptical expression, noting that they just look like a bunch of different ways to make fire. Abel explains that these are built on a completely new system, but since he was born without magic, he needs her to be the one to prove they actually work. He just needs to confirm once and for all if his theories can actually be used to cast real spells. Purcell stays quiet for a second, her eyes scanning the complex drawings on the pages. She asks him if these circles are encrypted or written in some secret code, but Abel tells her there's no trick to them at all. She looks back at him and asks if he's really being serious about these being functional, and Abel doesn't hesitate to tell her that he is. Purcell takes a breath and decides she's just going to come right out and say what's on her mind. Purcell looks Abel right in the eyes and asks him straight up if he's actually gone and become a heretic. Abel is completely caught off guard, asking what she's even talking about since there's no way he could be one of those gross, muddy monsters. Purcell stares back down at his work and admits she can't make sense of these magic circles at all, but she knows that whatever he's written here is definitely not part of any normal magic theory she's ever seen. Which makes Abel realize she's totally right. He thinks about the writings of higher powers for a second, but then realizes that's not even the real problem. The fact is that his magic system goes directly against the Origin series, and that realization alone is enough to label him as a heretic. He starts sweating, wondering if every mage alive would hunt him down for this. So he nervously asks her what would happen if the Origin series actually had a mistake in it. Purcell shuts that down immediately, saying that's impossible because the theory is perfect, and magic wouldn't even work if it wasn't. She looks at him with a really suspicious face and asks if he's actually being serious about questioning the foundation of magic. Abel completely loses it and starts yelling that of course he's not serious, trying his best to play it off. Abel starts panicking and yells that he loves the Origin series books more than anyone, trying to cover his tracks. Purcell just stands there for a second looking totally unconvinced by his sudden outburst. She eventually sighs and says, she guessed that's true, which lets Abel breathe a huge sigh of relief. She thinks maybe he just lost his focus after working so hard, but asks how the circles even work since she can't use them without the theory. Abel just snaps the papers away from her, which catches her completely off guard. He heads for the door and says he found a huge mistake, telling her they should just forget this whole talk ever happened. As he leaves, he realizes that for her to understand his work, she'd have to see the flaws in the origin series. And since she's already cursed, he can't risk her being labeled a heretic on top of everything else. He sits in his room later feeling stuck, knowing she was the only person he could actually talk to about this stuff. But he's determined to prove that even without magic power, casting spells is actually possible. Abel understands that the soul is the true source of all magic power, and mages simply turn that soul energy into spells. It's even possible for the best mages to shorten their chance. But there's a catch, since souls are also what keep people alive. If someone uses too much energy and drops below a certain point, their body fails, meaning that overusing magic is literally a death sentence. The real gap between mages and everyone else isn't some special gift. It's just the total amount of soul they're born with. So someone like Abel only has a tiny speck of soul energy compared to the massive flame a mage carries. For him, his entire soul is his critical mass, so using even a tiny bit for a spell would be fatal. Basically, having zero magic just means he has no extra soul energy to spare for casting anything. But if he looks at it from a different angle, even a guy like him could technically pull off magic. He'd just have to be reckless enough to burn his own life energy as a fuel source. He looks over his notes on the possibility and risks of using magic with zero ability, and starts thinking the theory seems more legit the more he looks at it. He knows it's the kind of crazy idea that most people would never take seriously, though he actually tried to test the theory on himself years ago when he first discovered it. It didn't go well, and he was eventually forced to give the whole thing up because even trying to cast a bottom-tier spell like Ignite draws enough power to be lethal for him. There is a major problem with how magic works, but if Abel can base his spells on science instead, the whole process changes. Usually, casting is hard because it's tied to how a spell is built, and it forces things to happen that would never actually be possible in the real world. Take a fireball, for example. A normal mage tries to make fire without even using oxygen, which is basically trying to force a phenomenon that's totally removed from reality. Abel's plan is different. If he uses science as the base, he can use actual physics to spark the magic. Doing it that way should make the energy cost way lower than modern magic. Or at least that's the theory he's worked out. He's come a long way with his research, and now the only thing left to do is actually test it out himself. He stops for a second, knowing that if his math is off even a little bit, he's probably going to die. He lets out a heavy sigh while looking over his notes, but there is no way he is backing down now. He gets to work and starts the energy conversion, even though the feedback hits him like a truck. His head and chest start throbbing with crazy pain, forcing him to double over as he finally understands what it feels like to use magic. The strain is so bad that his eye starts bleeding, but he doesn't even flinch. He just wipes the blood off his face with a determined look. He stares ahead and activates the circle, finishing the spell. Abel reaches out and touches the glowing magic circle, screaming as the energy starts to flow. He finishes the chant and looks completely shocked that he actually pulled it off. He stares at his hands, trying to process how he just used a real spell. But the effort completely drains him. He's gasping for air and realizes he's already hit his limit, having used up way more of his soul than he ever planned. He groans in pain, thinking about how tiny his magic capacity is. Then it hits him. A normal version of that spell would have killed him on the spot, so his new theory is definitely the way to go. Abel gets a look in his eye like he just figured out the missing piece of the puzzle. He realizes there's a way to get around his low energy, so he runs back to his room and dumps a whole bag of magic stones onto the table. He picks up one of the small gems. Looking at it closely through his glasses, he keeps his cool and clenches his fist before reaching out toward the circle again. A tiny bit of electricity starts to crackle at his fingertips, and with one loud shout of, "Ignite!" a massive spark of energy explodes right in front of him. Now that he knows it works, Abel gets right back to the grind in his lab. He stands there with his clipboard and a test tube, surrounded by his research and ready to take things to the next level. Abel rushes through the streets as the sun goes down, heading straight for the shop. He ducks inside and calls out a quick hello as he enters. Mr. Gannon looks up and greets him, noticing the kid is in a huge hurry. He assumes Abel is there for his order, but mentions that the gear he asked for isn't ready just yet. Abel waves that off and says that's not why he's there. He gets straight to the point and asks if the shop has any magic stones in stock, which catches Mr. Gannon a bit off guard. The shopkeeper pulls out a small container, explaining they don't really sell well, so he only has a few on him. Abel stares at the small pile in the box, wondering if this little bit will be enough to get the job done. Even if it's not much, he's just glad to have them. He thanks the man and tells him he'll take the whole lot right now. Mr. Ganon gets a kick out of how desperate the kid is. He starts laughing and asks if Abel's lamps at home suddenly burned out. Then Abel just gives him a little smile while looking at one of the gems. He tells the guy they aren't for lighting, but for a brand new experiment he's working on. These magic stones are basically just common rocks that have a tiny bit of mana trapped inside of them. The amount of power is so small that no one can really use them for actual magic, so they're mostly just used for streetlights. Abel remembers how he tried to use them for spells in the past and failed, but everything has changed now. With his new scientific approach to magic, he's ready to turn these useless rocks into something powerful. Abel focuses on the magic circle and calls out for it to ignite. A small flame sparks to life in his hand. All those times people told him to give up, or called him a failure flash through his head, but he finally did it. He just stares at his hand in total disbelief, realizing he's finally grabbed hold of the power to use magic. Moving on, 2 months pass by in the village while Abel keeps busy with his work. He heads back to the shop, and Mr. Ganon greets him as he asks if his latest order finally showed up. The shopkeeper drops a heavy bag on the counter, confirming it's got the tubes and all those magic stones Abel likes. Mr. Ganon starts laughing and asks if the kid is planning on opening his own lamp store with all this stuff. Abel just thanks him and heads out, feeling great about getting such a big haul this time around. He walks down the street humming to himself, thinking this stash of supplies should last him a good while. Ever since that first successful spell, he's been obsessed with pushing his research even further to create brand new magic. Abel thinks about how his science magic can copy any spell out there and actually make them work. He figures mixing science and magic is the way to go, even if they don't seem to fit, though he knows rebuilding everything from scratch means a ton of trial and error is coming his way. He admits his science knowledge is still a bit weak, but he's sure that more research will make his work way faster and more accurate. So even with a mountain of work waiting, he's not stressed at all and is just hyped with new ideas for what to do next. The kid is having a blast, feeling more satisfied than he can even put into words while he runs through the streets. Except reality hits when he looks at his empty wallet. He realizes he needs a money plan and starts worrying about his rent. He stops in his tracks when he realizes he honestly can't remember the last time he actually ate a real meal. Suddenly, he gets hit with a massive dizzy spell and the world starts going dark, making him wonder if his magic is messing with him. Moving on, a bell chimes as the door to a small shop nearby swings open. The shopkeeper tells a customer he's getting their order ready and will let them know when it's in, just as things start to shift. The shopkeeper finishes up a sale and thanks his customer for stopping by. Ganon hears people whispering and looks out to see a crowd gathering. They're all panicking because a kid just dropped in the middle of the road. Ganon realizes it's Abel on the ground and yells his name in a panic while the kid just lies there totally out of it. After getting him inside, Ganon can't help but laugh when he finds out Abel just fainted from hunger. He tells him that's a new one. Abel is super embarrassed and keeps apologizing, but Ganon tells him to forget about it since he's just glad it's not a real illness. He sets Abel up with a massive meal and tells him to eat his fill, wondering just how long it's been since the kid last had a bite. While Abel eats, Ganon brings up the family drama and says it's pretty crazy that his dad actually went through with disowning him. He points out that Abel had to move on from his dad's support eventually and grow up, for though the comment definitely stings a bit. Ganon watches him for a second and then speaks up again, looking like he has an idea. He looks Abel right in the eyes and asks if he'd be interested in taking a job at the bookstore. Ganon explains that he's well aware of Abel's insane knowledge when it comes to magic. He admits that even though he runs the shop, he doesn't actually know much about magic books himself. He tells Abel that having him around would be a massive help, so he's planning on leaving all the magic book sourcing to him while teaching him the rest of the business later on. Since the shop is usually pretty quiet, Ganon says the kid is free to read as much as he wants during the slow hours. Abel is moved by the offer and can barely get a word out. Ganon asks if that sounds like a fair deal, but Abel can see right through it. He knows the old man doesn't actually need the help and is just being incredibly generous to look out for him. Abel looks down at his drink and thanks Ganon from the bottom of his heart for the opportunity. But then Abel's tone shifts as he mentions there's actually something else he needs to take care of first, catching the shopkeeper off guard. Ganon looks at him with a serious expression, wondering what could be more important than getting his life back on track. He tells Abel that it might be time for him to finally start facing reality. Ganon reminds him that he's seen how much Abel has loved magic since he was a kid, and that his brain for magic theory is honestly on par with the best scholars out there. He admits he's often wished Abel just had some actual power to go with that knowledge. He knows it's a tough pill to swallow, but he thinks the kid needs to move on. Ganon doesn't sugarcoat things. He tells Abel it's just the sad truth that the kid doesn't have any magic. He goes on to say that not being able to do everything you want is just a part of life, and Abel is getting to the age where he has to accept that. But even as the old man tells him it's time to grow up, Abel is clearly trying to find the right moment to jump in and say something. Ganon brings up how his sister is doing amazing and mentions she's even applying for the Pram Magic Academy. He thinks that if Abel just focuses on his talent for magic books, he could really be someone. But Abel suddenly shouts that he's figured it out. The kid grabs Ganon's hands and thanks him with a huge smile on his face. The shopkeeper is totally confused, and then Abel drops the bombshell. He announces that he's actually going to apply for the Pram Magic Academy himself. Ganon completely loses it, yelling out in shock because he can't believe what he just heard. Crowds move through the station, heading for the huge academy dome. Abel stands at the giant gates, looking up at his new school. Abel tells Ganon to watch close and then calls out a spell. A massive crystal spear just appears out of nowhere, leaving the shopkeeper completely floored. Ganon can't even find his words at first, eventually just yelling out in pure disbelief because he can't wrap his head around how a kid with 0 mana is doing this. He stares at the magic, asking how it's even possible, and reaches out to touch the spear. The cold sting on his hand proves it's not an illusion. The magic is actually real, so Ganon absolutely loses it. He starts smacking Abel on the back, shouting about how the kid really did it and learned magic, while the old man starts crying because he's so proud. Abel looks pretty worn out from the spell and the rough hits, but Ganon doesn't care and just pulls him into a massive hug, yelling his name in excitement. Once they settle down at the table, Ganon gets serious and says that even if he can use magic now, applying to a place like Pram is still crazy. The old man tries to shut the idea down, but Abel isn't budging. He insists that it has to be that specific academy, and he just gives a confident grin, telling the old man to stay tuned and watch him make it happen. Abel points out that if he actually manages to get into Pram, the government covers the entire tuition, which totally catches Ganon off guard. Abel confirms that's the plan, looking more serious than usual, and then he brings up the book Ganon lent him. He asks if he can buy that ancient language text for himself, but Ganon starts to freak out a bit. He explains the book is actually dangerous since it talks bad about the Origins series. If the authorities saw it, they'd ban it and burn it in a heartbeat, so Abel tries to argue that it's a goldmine of info for his research. Ganon tells him to slow down, saying a shop like his can't just sell unhinged stuff like that, and he tells Abel to just take the book and dispose of it somewhere else. He makes sure the kid promises to keep it a total secret where he got it from, but then the old man brings up another problem. He reminds Abel that he's basically broke, especially since he fainted in the street from hunger, and asks how he's even going to pay for the trip there. Before Abel can even worry, Ganon gives him a huge grin and a thumbs up. He tells the kid he's going to lend him the money to make it happen, and he says, this is the big start of Abel's journey as a mage, so he'd better go out there and pass those exams with no problem. Standing outside the shop, Abel is completely moved by how much the old man is doing for him, shouting his name in gratitude. Abel finally makes it to the front of the Pram Magic Academy. It's huge, and he can't believe he's actually standing right in front of the place. He always planned on coming here for his Sage Stone research anyway, but actually applying as a student feels like a massive jump. He even put on a tie today just to look the part, but in the middle of the crowd, a girl accidentally bumps right into him. She's quick to apologize for being clumsy, though Abel just tells her it's fine and keeps moving since there are way more people here than he expected. He figures they were all the top students at their old schools, but at least the massive crowd means he probably won't run into his sister Purcell, which is a huge relief for him. Suddenly, a staff member at the top of the stairs starts shouting for everyone to listen up. He tells the group to head his way for registration, explaining they need to get their magic levels checked before they can even get their exam vouchers, which instantly makes Abel break a sweat. He wasn't expecting a magic measurement right out of the gate, and the thought of it has him feeling pretty stressed out as he finally reaches the front of the line. The guy at the desk doesn't even look up, just telling him he's next and asking for his name and what school he's coming from. Abel introduces himself as Abel Gilbert, but then casually mentions he doesn't actually go to any school. The clerk stops dead in his tracks, looking totally confused by the kid, so Abel just wonders to himself if it's really that weird to be self-taught at a place like this. The guy eventually shakes it off and just asks for his address and birthday to finish the paperwork, and then he points toward a strange-looking device on the table. He tells Abel it's time to measure his actual magical ability, ordering him to hold his hand over the apparatus to see what he can do. Abel puts his hand over the measurement tool, but the screen just pings and stays totally empty. The clerk stares at the 0 reading, his jaw dropping as he yells out in total shock at how low the numbers are, which Abel just shrugs off. He gives the guy a bit of a look and points out there isn't actually a rule against taking the test with low levels. The clerk just stammers, not really having an answer for that. So Abel lets out a sigh of relief and starts walking away, thinking he's finally in. But before he can even get a few steps, some girl behind him starts shouting, telling him that if he's only here for fun, he should just leave, and she doesn't stop there. She crosses her arms and stares him down, making it very clear she's talking directly to him. Abel looks back and tells her he's not treating this like a joke, but she just snaps at him, saying she saw exactly what his magic levels looked like on the screen. She starts making a scene in front of everyone, asking if he's actually magicless and yelling that this place isn't meant for people who can't use spells, which Abel doesn't take lying down. He tells her that peeking at someone else's test results is pretty rude, then mutters to himself about how loud she's being. The girl just gets more annoyed and tells him to stop changing the subject. She wants to know how he even thinks he can take a magic exam when he doesn't have any power at all. And she keeps going, saying he's just going to be in the way of the people who are actually serious. The crowd starts whispering and acting shocked that someone has zero magic, while she tells him to just get out. But Abel stands his ground. He looks her right in the eyes and tells her that taking the exam is his decision, and he doesn't have a single reason to listen to her. The girl keeps screaming at Abel to get back there and asks if he's just running away, but he doesn't even look back as he walks off. And just then, a loud announcement rings out across the grounds. Everyone is told to gather up because the tournament brackets are being handed out. A staff member yells for everyone to head to their assigned group areas once they have their papers. He makes sure to mention that their examinee numbers are printed right on the brackets, and gives a final warning that anyone who isn't there when their name is called will be disqualified on the spot. Abel looks over the rules and sees that every student has to go through 5 different matches. He realizes the academy uses real combat for the exam to find people with actual talent, and winning at least 4 matches is the only way to pass. The rules are simple. A fight is over if someone surrenders, or if the referee decides a student can't fight anymore. No matter what happens, the ref's word is final. On top of that, how well they do in these fights determines which class they'll be placed in if they actually manage to get in. Walking through the building, they finally reach the designated battlefield, a massive open area designed for magic combat. The students line up around the edge of a giant circular arena. The girl looks completely locked in, while Abel just stares ahead, ready to get started. The announcer calls out the next student, introducing Kent Romero from the Cristo Private Academy. Kent just stands there with a bored look on his face, acting like he's too good to be there, but the announcer hesitates as he reads the next name. He sounds confused when he points out that the next guy isn't even in junior high, which immediately gets the whole crowd whispering in disbelief. He announces the independent candidate, Abel Gilbert, leaving Procel staring from the stands in total shock while Abel walks out looking completely focused. Kent can't help but laugh when he hears the news, mockingly asking what's going on. He finds it hilarious that he's actually being paired up against a kid who never even went to school. Abel doesn't let the trash talk get to him, just crossing his arms and calmly stating he has his reasons for not being in school. Kent just scoffs at the idea of reasons and keeps the insults coming, asking if Abel is just skipping class or if he's only here because he thinks this is some kind of game. He doubles down, telling Abel he's probably just praying for a lucky punch to win the match at the last second. But then he suggests that Abel should probably find a place more on his own level. He brags that only the best of the best are even allowed to apply to the Pram Magic Academy, though he figures a guy like Abel wouldn't know that. Kent starts celebrating already, saying he basically just got a free win. He's acting like he hit the jackpot by getting a bonus stage for his very first fight. He gives a final warning that he won't be holding back, but Abel is just blown away by the guy's ego. Instead of getting mad, Abel decides he'll just use this loudmouth as a warm-up and call it a day. The crowd is already checking out, with people whispering that the fight is basically over before it even starts. They're already making plans to go find another match that's actually worth watching. While down in the arena, Abel calmly admits that he really didn't go to school. Kent just scoffs, telling him that's just a plain fact. But the conversation gets cut short as the announcer yells for the match to officially begin. Abel doesn't waste any time, pulling out a small catalyst and calling out his first spell, Pression Air. A massive, complicated magic circle forms right in front of him, and Kent stares at it, totally confused by the weird design of the magic circle. He recognizes it's wind magic, but he's never seen anything like that before, so he just stands there as a tiny little breeze hits him, barely even ruffling his cloak. He starts losing it, laughing his head off because the attack was so weak. He mocks the kid, asking what that was even supposed to be while he keeps laughing, barely able to believe that Abel's big move was just a light breeze. He's actually wheezing now, holding his stomach and apologizing because he didn't realize Abel was going to be this pathetic. Kent decides he's had enough of the joke, telling Abel he'll show him how real magic works. He starts charging up his own power, promising to end this whole thing in a second. Kent suddenly starts choking, his hands flying to his throat as he realizes he can't get any air, while Abel just watches him struggle with a completely calm look in his eyes. He gives a quiet apology, but he makes it clear that the match is already over. Kent drops to his knees, gasping for air that isn't there, as Abel stands over him, and then the arrogant kid just face plants onto the floor with a heavy thud, totally out of it. The referee and Abel stand there for a second, each looking down at Kent's motionless body on the ground, until the announcer finally snaps out of it and yells that Abel is the winner of the match. The entire crowd is just frozen, eyes wide and mouths open because they can't process what just happened. People start whispering to each other, asking how Abel even pulled that off when nobody actually saw a hit land. So the medical team gets called out immediately. Witnesses are pointing out that Kent just stopped breathing out of nowhere. I'm leaving. Everyone confused. They can't believe a simple breeze could knock a guy out like that, while the medics rush Kent off to the infirmary for some potions. The people in the crowd are losing it, trying to figure out how a famous student from Cristo Academy just got wrecked, and by a guy who never even went to school. They're all whispering Abel's name and wondering who he actually is, as Abel walks away and finally lets out a breath, admitting he was actually pretty nervous. He thinks to himself that he might have overdone it for his first real fight, even if everything went exactly how he planned. He's just glad his magic works, in a real battle. To him, it wasn't even anything special because he was just using a basic spell to move air around, but his version is different. Instead of just making a breeze, he only moves the nitrogen in the air to trap his opponent in an invisible bubble. Since the guy is surrounded by pure nitrogen, he can't get any oxygen into his lungs, which is basically a death sentence for any living thing. Humans need oxygen to survive, and by taking it away, Abel finishes the fight instantly. He realizes that if he hadn't spent all that time studying science, he never would have known this simple secret. It hits him that he's probably the only mage in the entire world who actually understands how this works. Abel stands there with his hand in his pocket, checking his status. He realizes the amount of magic he has left isn't an issue at all because the spell he just used was so small that he can't even tell if he used any mana. He thinks he could probably breeze through the whole tournament using air control, though he worries the conditions won't always be perfect, and he definitely doesn't want to face Purcell with it. This science magic he's using is on a whole different level, only needing a tiny fraction of the power that regular mages waste. It's such a massive difference that even a guy like him, who was told he had zero magic, can use it whenever he wants. It really makes him wonder what magic actually is, at its core. To him, just throwing fire or water around doesn't really count as real magic, since he's learned it's more like a tool to rewrite the laws of physics. Usually, bending those laws takes a mountain of energy, but Abel's found a way around that, by using science. Suddenly, a massive cheer from the crowd snaps him out of it, and he realizes his next match is already starting. He's pretty impressed that this place has so many different arenas, but now he just has to find the 7th battlefield without getting lost. On his way there. Meanwhile, on another field, the announcer crowns Purcell the winner after she absolutely wrecks her opponent without breaking a sweat. Inside the Lucius Academy student waiting room, a professor tells Purcell she totally crushed her first 4 fights. Since she did so well, her passing grade is already locked in, so he congratulates her, calling her the absolute pride of the school. He mentions there's only 1 match left and he's hyped to see her finish with a perfect record, and Purcell just gives a simple thanks, looking pretty calm about the whole thing. The professor adds that while he isn't actually worried, there are some weird rumors going around about another student. He warns her that she might have to face this guy next, explaining that this kid uses some mystery magic nobody recognizes and apparently never even stepped foot in a school. But the craziest part is the rumor that his magic measurement was a flat 0. The professor laughs it off as total nonsense, but Purcell's face completely drops. The professor asks if something's wrong, but she just brushes it off while internally freaking out. She keeps telling herself there's no way it could actually be him. While over in the 2nd round, Abel's opponent hits the floor with a groan. The announcer yells out that Abel takes the win, and then he just sails through the 3rd round just as easily, leaving another person down while the crowd goes wild for him. Everyone watching is totally confused because he keeps using the same weak-looking wind spell. They start whispering, trying to figure out if it's just basic air magic or something way more technical. The whispers start spreading through the crowd as they focus on the guy himself. Everyone's talking, saying they heard the news too, but wondering how something like that is even possible. They're all doubting if it could even be true, while the rumor keeps going that the kid actually has zero magic. Abel walks along, realizing he's used the exact same spell to win 3 times in a row now. He can feel the rumors about a mystery student spreading like crazy. In the end, he honestly never expected to cause this much of a scene. He wonders how the info about his zero magic rating even got out. But then the announcer calls for round 4, introducing the independent candidate Abel Gilbert against Anya Idish from Cristo Private Academy. She stands there acting all high and mighty, saying she's surprised he made it this far and calling him Mr. No Magic. She starts yelling at him to leave since he's magicless, and Abel just sighs, wishing he didn't have to deal with her again. Anya gets right in his face, telling him not to lump her in with the weaklings he fought before. She claims his cheap tricks won't work on her at all, pointing a finger at him while bragging that she watched his matches and knows exactly how he won. Abel just stands there wondering what she even means by cheap tricks. Anya points a finger and smirks, yelling that Abel used poison to win his other matches. Abel just stands there sweating, trying to tell her that's not it while the announcer shouts for the match to start. Abel immediately kicks things off with a spell called Pression Air, but Anya just laughs it off and uses her own wind magic, whipping up a massive storm that fills the entire arena. She stands right in the middle of the chaos while Abel watches from the edge, seeing Anya laughing in his face. She asks him what he thinks now, bragging that his poison tricks are totally useless against her wind. Abel doesn't say a word, just thinks to himself that it's not actually poison, but her quick thinking is actually pretty impressive. He realizes her wind is strong enough to shut down his air control, meaning he has to switch it up. He calls out a spell called Fiero Lanza and fires a glowing spear straight at her. Anya sees it coming and just acts unimpressed. She mocks him for being able to use regular magic after all, though she thinks it's way too basic to actually do anything to her. She fires off a massive fireball that collides with his spear in a huge explosion of heat and light. It looks like a perfect move because everyone knows fire is the textbook way to cancel out ice magic. They're complete opposites, so they usually just wipe each other out. But that's only if he was actually using a regular ice spell in the first place. Abel's spear hits the fireball and triggers a massive explosion that catches Anya completely off guard, sending her flying back across the arena floor until she hits the ground with a heavy thud. Anya groans in pain, trying to wrap her head around how an ice spell could possibly explode like that, since everyone knows you need the fire element to create a blast. She looks totally wiped out, but she's mostly just confused because Fiero Lanza doesn't use fire at all. Now, so the math isn't adding up. Abel looks at her calmly, thinking that her logic holds up for standard magic, even while Anya yells out, demanding to know his secret. Abel starts explaining that fire and water elements don't really exist as physical things, and that heat is just moving molecules. He used her fireball to flash evaporate his ice, using her own energy, to create that massive steam explosion. Anya just lies there coughing, not completely unable to move while Abel walks over to check on her. He asks if she's all right, then tells her it's over and she should just concede. Anya stares Abel down with pure rage in her eyes, telling him there is absolutely no way she is quitting. She forces herself back up, threatening to beat him to a pulp for what he did. Abel is caught completely off guard, watching her suddenly start a new invocation. He realizes too late that she's actually pulling off a massive summoning spell, and a second later, the Phoenix shows up, surrounding her with these huge, glowing energy wings. This is some seriously high-end dark magic used for bringing out evil spirits, and Anya looks totally different now. Abel recognizes the creature as an immortal fire demon. He can't believe she can actually use magic this advanced, especially since all the damage she took from his last attack has already vanished. With this spell active, any hit she takes will just heal up instantly. Everyone in the crowd is losing it, saying they've never seen magic this big before. It's exactly the kind of power they'd expect from a top-tier academy student. One girl looks on, totally relieved she isn't the one facing that kind of trump card, while the rest of the spectators just watch in silence, waiting to see how Abel is going to survive this. Anya floats high above the arena, wings spread wide, and tells Abel she honestly never expected to use this kind of power on him. She has this wild, manic look on her face as she admits he's actually pretty impressive for a nobody. But then she screams for him to die, launching a massive black fireball called Frama de Fuego right at him. She tells him to just perish already, clearly loving the sheer size of the attack she's just unleashed. But Abel just stands there, totally calm, telling himself to focus while he starts calculating the distance and speed of the fire. As he locks onto the target, he calls out his own spell, gravity manipulation, and math circles start appearing everywhere, which shows the entire arena watching as this huge ball of fire gets caught in a glowing grid of magic, stopping it cold. Anya looks on in total shock as Abel's calculations completely take over the flow of the battle, leaving her ultimate move just hanging there in the air, unable to move a single inch closer to its target. Abel thinks back to when he was younger, remembering that the only way to truly control this kind of power is through universal gravitation. Abel looks at his old notes and wonders what he was even thinking back then, reading through the part where he figured out that matter pulls on other matter because of gravity, which is why things fall, and how the Earth orbits the sun. The text goes deeper into the math, but explaining that the gravity everyone feels is actually a mix of the Earth's natural pull and the force from the planet spinning. It turns out there were two big ideas he was looking at: the main gravity theory and something called vortex theory, which claimed the whole universe was just full of tiny swirling particles making everything move. Young Abel realized he had a unique way to settle the debate. He didn't just have to guess because he could use magic as a shortcut to find the truth. He figured that if a scientific theory was actually right, then any magic built on those rules would work perfectly in the real world. So, he spent a crazy amount of time through trial and error building magic circles for both ideas, and after running all his experiments, the winner was clear. Back in the present, Anya's massive fireball just blinks out of existence, leaving her hanging in the air with nothing to show for her big move. She's totally confused, wondering if he somehow cut off her mana flow, but she tries to double down by activating her own gravity magic. It doesn't work out like she planned. Her eyes go wide as she feels a massive force suddenly hammer down on her from above, and she gets slammed into the pavement so hard she can't even move, just groaning while the weight pins her to the arena floor. Anya is stuck face down on the ground, barely able to make a sound as the weight of the gravity magic crushes her down. Abel looks down at her struggling and warns her that she really shouldn't even try to move in this state. But he stands over her and tells her that's enough, suggesting she should just give up and surrender right now. Anya isn't having it and looks up with pure rage, yelling that there's no way she's surrendering and telling him not to underestimate her. She lets out a scream as the pressure intensifies, but she's still trying to fight it, telling herself it's not over and this isn't enough to break her. Abel points out that she's being stubborn for no reason since there's logically nothing she can do, which just makes her snap and tell him to shut up. He mentions she's the one being loud and that shouting is just a waste of energy, but she just gets even more insulted, calling him a zero mana nobody. Anya manages to launch a sudden gust of wind at him, but Abel is already ahead of her, using his own air manipulation to keep the pressure on. He's actually impressed she can still block in this condition while keeping her Phoenix power active, even admitting to himself that he's a little jealous of her talent. Since her Phoenix nullifies most magic and he can't increase the gravity without accidentally killing her, Abel decides his best bet is to just wait until she wears herself out. Abel realizes his energy isn't limitless and he still has more rounds to go, so he decides he has no choice but to use his trump card. He really didn't want to have to go this far, but it's the only way to end things quickly. He starts focusing his power. Magic circles and complex math formulas start appearing everywhere as he charges up. He calls out a lightning strike, and a massive bolt of electricity drops from the sky, slamming right into Anya and ending the fight in a flash. When the smoke clears, and Anya is lying face down, completely knocked out while Abel stands over her. But suddenly Abel starts gasping and coughing hard. He's clearly pushed himself way past his limit. He looks down at his palm and sees he's coughing up blood. Things are looking pretty bad for him right now. He notices that the blast was so strong it completely shattered every single mana stone Anya was wearing. Abel thinks to himself that his grasp on lightning magic is still pretty weak, and since the stones couldn't handle the output, the spell ended up draining his own soul energy. He figures he should just be glad the move even worked in the first place, considering how dangerous it was to pull off. The crowd is losing it, and one of the guys yells out while another asks what that magic even was. Someone asks if anyone caught what type of magic he used, but everyone just saw a really bright flash. They can't hear anything through the barrier anyway, so people are just guessing that Anya might have collapsed from being tired. Abel is glad nobody realized he used lightning, mostly because in this day and age, nobody is supposed to be able to use it. He knows it would cause a massive scene if word got out, especially since everyone thinks he has zero mana to begin with. It wasn't the best idea to use an incomplete technique so publicly, but he didn't have much of a choice, so he checks on Anya and confirms she's just knocked out, thinking his secret should be safe for a bit longer. The announcer yells out that Abel is the winner while he stands there in the middle of the arena. As he walks off, the board flips over to show the 5th match is coming up next, leaving Abel focused on the fact that he's finally made it to the last round of the tournament.